Good morning, everyone. I think we will get started, even if people are still kind of slowly coming in. We'll keep the doors open for those who are still interested in coming in. I want to thank you all for coming and joining us relatively early and braving the queues for such what is a sort of relatively not a very uplifting topic this morning, but so my name is Andreas. I'm the Program Development and Digital Freedom Advisor for a non-profit based in Copenhagen, International Media Support. We're organizing this session. We're talking about online harassment as one of the most pervasive and most severe problems when it comes to inclusivity and diversity and online discourse. It reaches everyone, and no one's really safe, although obviously some people are more at risk, and it has more of a disproportional detrimental effect on some people than others. But we'll hear about some of those things from panelists. My hope with this session is that we'll get to talk about not only the problems and the complexity of online harassment, but also try to take a constructive angle and see what solutions or ways of responding to the issue is out there and which are being taken by both civil society and other groups. So I hope we can have a discussion about some of the constructive ways to respond to online harassment, some practical, realistic ways. And to help us with that, we've got a really fantastic panel. And I'll introduce them in a second. They'll just do brief, sort of 5-minute introductions from each of their perspectives, and then we'll hopefully have a good discussion afterwards. As I said, we have a stellar panel from left to right, your left to right, is Ngibenga from Paradigm Initiative Nigeria. Then we have Ellery from Global Voices. We have Jonathan from Media Legal Defense Initiative in the UK. And we have Marcel Leonardi from Google Brazil. And we have Hiram from Digital Rights Foundation in Pakistan. So a diverse group of perspectives on an issue that is really incredibly complex. So I wanted to just get us starting with you, Ngibenga, if you want to kick us off from your perspective.
Okay. Interesting. This turns red when it comes on, not green. Okay, so, well, I see you almost said an interesting topic and then you corrected that. It's obviously something that is worrying, but I want to look at this from two different angles. First of all is to obviously establish that over the last few months, either because of elections or topical issues that are being debated on social media, we see a lot more, harassment in terms of people, especially when debates get quite, heated. People, get threatened. From some of the work that we did at Pain, we did some study recently on why, because access is a major issue as far as we're concerned in Nigeria. We've got numbers that say 50% internet penetration, but we know the numbers are much lower than that. We know they're much lower than that because the telecom regulator measures in terms of numbers of SIM cards and not the numbers of individuals who are registered. And so it's easier for you to say, hey, there are 140 million phones, but really there are much less people who are using this. And we were very interested in talking to a specific category of people who are not usually involved with online conversations. And these are young people who are in either urban slums or who are sort of underserved. I mean, the primary people that we work with in terms of training. And what we realized was that while the men, the boys did everything possible to get online, and they did get online. We had a huge disparity in terms of number of men and women online. And when we asked questions, first it was the fact that culturally, a lot of the women are more involved in domestic work. But when we dug deeper, we realized that one major reason why they don't come online and why they're not very interested in debates, and even when they do come online, why they prefer not to use their names, is because of online harassment. There have been many popular cases in Nigeria of vocal women who have been, who have had feedback that wasn't very interesting, including pictures, including suspicious. I say suspicious because you can't even prove that this is the person who is being, so to speak, shamed online because the picture isn't very clear. But someone is arguing with a popular blogger. There's a very popular female blogger who is, she doesn't hide her opinion, and we love her for that. But one of the things that she knows she will always get is terrible feedback. So people will post pictures and say, hey, the reason she's this vocal is because she has money, and the reason she has money is because she sells her body, and when she was in school, she did and that. And there is not one time that they've posted a picture that has shown her face clearly. But the moment somebody posts that, other people who have argued with her, who didn't like what she said, will then start retweeting. A lot of them have retweet is not equal to endorsement in their bio, but we know in that case, retweeting online harassment is definitely been a party to it. And so this is something that's very terrible. But what we have also seen, so we asked a few of them, what would you do if someone did that to you online? And 100% said they would get offline. And that was worrying for us because the question was, what if your education depended on it? And the response was, well, I'll find somewhere else, to get my education. And that's troubling, because you can't leave the entire internet and say you want to go and find your education somewhere else. But one thing that we also found out was that there was one particular case. There was one person who returned and sent an email and wanted to be anonymous and said, well, that she thinks that she will be able to come back online after a while. And we dug further. And the reason she said that was because there was a scenario where somebody was being harassed, but in return, a lot of men responded. Now, not the victim herself. And I think this is really important in terms of online harassment, that the best response is not from the victim. The best response is from a supportive community. Because if the victim responds, it goes deeper into the argument. But if there's an online community, then it sort of validates the response. It's not the person you're attacking who is responding, but they're getting some support. And that's one of the things that we got as feedback. And the second thing was that, she said if the and she particularly mentioned Facebook because, that's the more popular platform. And that if Facebook is able to, and these are our words exactly, if Facebook is able to punish these guys who harass us, then maybe more of us will come online. And when we asked her if she knew about the tools to report, and things like that, she had no idea. So I think there's a lot more, necessity for education in terms of tools to report and all that. Now that's part A, and I hope I've only spent 3 minutes. Okay, in 30 seconds, I'll just say, and this, by the way, was what I thought I would spend more time on. But this second side of online harassment, I think that while having this conversation, we also need to be a bit careful because it has become an opportunity for harassment itself. And I'll give a very simple example and close. So Nigeria has a cybercrime law that was signed in 2015. And it was supposed to address issues like online harassment, like cyber stalking. But guess what? The people who have been victims of this law are people who have been harassed and stalked themselves, bloggers. And so when, we need to be very careful because there are governments, there are institutions, there are individuals who are looking for excuses to be able to victimize other people, and they may be able to use this. So there are conversations around harassment, and people come on and then say, hey, wait a second, this platform is open to harassment, let's shut it down. So that people don't get harassed. We know of countries that have shut down the internet because students were writing exams and you didn't want students to cheat during exams. And this is, well, I know I have only minus 5 seconds left, so I'll just close. I'll close by saying that, we need to be careful because there's a risk for freedom of expression and even harassment itself when we have these conversations and there's a lazy way to have the conversation. The lazy way is to say, there's harassment online, let's be careful, let's not use it. But there's a more deliberate way to have the conversation to say, we can fix those problems, we can educate ourselves better, but at the same time, let's not create another problem while trying to solve this problem.
Thank you very much, Gebenge. And Ellery, please.
That was a great setup, actually, for me. So I work with Global Voices, which is an international network and community of writers, translators, and activists in more than 160 countries. Most of our community is made up of volunteer writers and translators. And our mission is to tell stories about communities and people who are less represented or misrepresented in mainstream media narratives. That has taken on a lot of different forms over the years since our founding 11 years ago by Rebecca McKinnon, who's sitting front row. And one of those forms is the branch of the organization and community that I help to facilitate, which is our advocacy project, also known as AdVox. And we decided that we needed to carve out a special space for our community and partners to really talk about threats that people and groups experience because of the civic engagement and public interest reporting that they're doing online. So we're a media organization. We're telling stories all the time, and we're making critiques, and we're inviting critiques. So we accept that harassment is part of the picture. It's part of unfortunately, part of the ecosystem that we operate in. I've been trying to think about this question in a systematic way, and I find myself breaking it down like a journalist. So the who, what, when, where, how, those kinds of questions come to mind. Who harassment affects matters. So who's doing the harassing and who is being targeted. Those pieces are really, really important. What is the nature of the harassment? What is the content of it? And as you're just saying, where does it happen? Both in digital space, what kind of platform it occurs on, but then also what country, jurisdiction, region. All of those things are important. And understanding the problem and being able to think about solutions, I think it's really fundamental to be able to put those pieces of context together in order to think about a response. One of the issues that we have had a ton of problems, our writers have faced a lot of problems related to gender. We're a very gender balanced, or we actually tip a little bit more female than male. So what Benga was describing sounds very familiar. Another area that we encounter quite a lot is state-backed or informally allied state actors that are targeting our writers and calling them traitors, calling them spies, often if they're women, often combining that with some kind of sexual harassment or sort of a low-level threat. So, but even then, the question of how do you think about a state actor really depends on the state. We've been doing some work. We have a strong community in Venezuela where there's actually a quite very open public organization of state-affiliated and supporters of the state who really spend a fair amount of their time online targeting informally and sometimes more formally journalists who are critical of the government. And it's not a secret. There's actually an open Telegram account run by the agency that controls media, and so that's very interesting to be able to see. Whereas in other contexts, it's much more quiet. It's much harder to see sort of a clear link there. We are, I would say, as concerned and conscious about the free expression implications of trying to solve these problems through legislation or any kind of public policy solution. And for us, I think that the question first of how we work together internally, how do we form mentorship kind of systems for our community, that's been a really, really big part of how we think about this. A lot of our younger or newer contributors will find themselves in a situation where they're testing the waters, they're testing out what works, first of all, as a narrative that will be popular and that will engage more people in their issue, but while you're doing that, you may step into a territory that leads you to a lot of trouble from another side. So oftentimes what sort of a first step for us when that happens is to figure out who in the community has been there and get together in a very private, secure space, whether online or off, and to talk about it. And it's important, one, in figuring out what's sort of a strategy for that person, how can the community help, maybe in ways like what Benga was talking about, but also maybe in a more private way. And then, two, it helps us figure out how to help that person as an individual, because it is really over time when this stuff happens to you, it hurts, and there are changes that'll happen in the way that you feel about yourself and about the kind of work that you're trying to do, and we don't want people to feel alone when they're experiencing this. So I have a lot more to say, but I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Ellery. And Jonathan, you'll have plenty to say, I'm sure, about being careful in addressing it on the free speech and
absolutely
implications. Thank you.
Sorry, I have a cold at the moment, and I'm Northern Irish, and I'm running on very little sleep, so if you don't understand what I'm saying, it's my fault, not yours. I'm from the Media Legal Defence Initiative, an NGO that represents journalists, bloggers, and media outlets, and helps them defend their rights. So I'm going to be looking at this specifically from a legal perspective, and I can see everybody's faces just lighten up at that prospect. They're really excited. Law is just such a lovely thing. So I'll start off by saying Gbenga drew upon a very problematic example of online harassment and the implications of that. And domestic and regional courts have recognized the new forms of harm that can be experienced through the internet and the unique, sustained, and particularly serious harm that online speech can have. And the UK is actually a pretty good example of a jurisdiction that uses laws that applied offline to the online context, but has also developed laws in response to online harassment specifically. And I should think they're pretty uncontentious from a free speech angle, but willing to debate that. So laws against threats of violence, hate crime, stalking, harassment, and revenge porn, which is becoming an increasingly problematic area. But as Gbenga said, legislating against cyber harassment opens up the possibility of over-censorship or a kind of threatening and chilling atmosphere for freedom of expression. And one area in which we see this developing in particular is a response to cyberbullying. And we see this in cybercrimes legislation around the world in particular. And the UK actually adopted a legislative approach, which has been almost copy and pasted from by a number of other jurisdictions. So I'm going to talk very, very briefly about the UK, India, and Kenya and how they've responded to this legislative provision against cyberbullying specifically. So this provision criminalizes communications online that are grossly offensive, indecent, obscene, or menacing, or communications online that are false, but communicated with the purpose of causing annoyance, inconvenience, or needless anxiety. Now, the Indian Supreme Court has struck out this legislative provision. They've found it to be unconstitutional, and that's for a number of reasons. The language, you can probably tell already, words like menacing, grossly offensive, annoying, inconvenient, have incredibly nebulous, they're incredibly nebulous in nature. But they're also, the Supreme Court is also very critical of the fact there's a lack of clear guidance on when these provisions would be used against online content. And Kenya, similarly, in a case, Andare against the Attorney General. We have a lawyer in from Kenya, Anthony, in the corner, who might want to discuss a little bit about the implications of this particular judgment for Kenya. They struck out the same provision. They found it unconstitutional because it was vague, imprecise, and undefined. So this shows how a legislative response to cyberbullying specifically can really open up a kind of chilling atmosphere for free speech online. The UK, on the other hand, hasn't struck out this piece of legislation. What they've done instead was set out very clear guidance on when individuals should be prosecuted under the Communications Act there. And it's quite interesting because they distinguish between the first kind of cyber harassment type laws that I introduced at the start, threats to violence, hate crime, stalking, harassment and revenge porn like laws. They said prosecution under these laws will most likely be in the public interest, whilst prosecution under the specific provision that was struck out in India and Kenya would be unlikely to be in the public interest. So they have said that they will approach prosecution with caution under this provision. And there are a number of aspects of the online communications that they'll look at and take into account, and it's quite interesting to look at some of that guidance if we're going to legislate in our own countries to tackle cyberbullying specifically. So they've made it quite clear that it has to be more than just simply offensive, shocking or disturbing. It shouldn't criminalize satirical or rude comments, and you can't just target or prosecute somebody for publishing content online that it just is unpopular or unfashionable or against the mores of the day. They also take into account the victim themselves. Was the communication targeted specifically at the individual, or was it kind of spread more widely without it being directed against the individual specifically? Was there a clear intention to target the individual, or did they think that that communication wouldn't reach them or wouldn't harm them? Has there been actual harm for the victim? Does it have hate crime elements? Does it form part of a coordinated attack against an individual? Is it a repeated offence? The age of the victim? And critically, whether it engages political or public interest commentary. And they will really look at these factors when determining whether to prosecute somebody under this really vague piece of legislation. So it's very easy to say, let's legislate against cyberbullying. I see the UK has a legislative provision in place. Let's copy and paste that and do something about online harassment. But it's quite clear the UK has taken a very context-specific approach to this provision, and they're not using it in such a way that there is no guidance, there are no balancing of any rights, which was the worry in both India and Kenya when they adopted the same provision. So that's just a little bit of an overview of some of the approaches adopted by those countries, and hopefully we can discuss that approach. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. And you're all staying very neatly on time-ish, so that's very nice. And Marcel from Google Brazil, please.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak here on behalf of Google Brazil. I could give lots of different examples on how Google tackles globally the problems of hate speech, extreme speech, harassment in general, but I'll speak to the experiences that I know closer to home, which is what I do in public policy in Google Brazil. So obviously Brazilian legislation does provide for content takedowns, for identifying infringers, and the usual legal remedies that you have when you need to tackle harassment. But what we have noticed actually there is the problem of self-censorship by groups that are harassed in general. That's really something that the law fails to capture because obviously it never comes to light. And a few numbers will help me illustrate my point. So for example, Brazilians are actually the second most active group of users on YouTube in content consumption. So Brazilians really love watching videos on YouTube in general. But we have noticed that African Brazilians, for example, they are severely lacking in not only in content creation, but also in fostering communities in general on that platform specifically. And as we investigated why that was happening as part of a global effort to better understand that, the question of self-censorship and harassment came immediately to light. So Google, for example, has done last September a big event regarding YouTube, which we call YouTube Global Summit for Social Change. The whole idea was to show the importance of diversity in general. But we soon realized that the messages that certain parts of the world are most concerned with, for example, countering hate speech and extreme content, terrorist speech, that kind of thing, was not really reflected down there, whereas harassment and racism was clearly present there. So what did we do? We actually did a specific Creators for Change event in Brazil. We invited 25 of the top African Brazilian YouTubers to showcase their views and to discuss that, but obviously Google lacks the expertise to lead that kind of discussion. So we partnered with an institute in Brazil called Instituto Mídia Étnica, which is a very long-established group that pretty much has as its main core activity the job of fostering more voices from the African Brazilian community to be online and also to be present in everyday life. And it was amazing to perceive exactly and confirm what we have noticed with some studies, that most people, they just, when they get harassed, when they get attacked, when they are victims of racism, rather than actually seeking legal remedies, unless they are like a prominent person with resources in all kinds of sense, like time and money and dedication to that kind of issue, they just prefer to shut down rather than talk. So that event was very important to help showcase all of this community that counter speech is probably one of the most relevant tools that we can use. And actually it leads me to a very important second point, which is because Brazil kind of facilitates these legal remedies, it's really cheap to go to court and have content taken down and try to identify infringers. What we have noticed that we severely lack in the region, not only in Brazil but Latin America in general, is what they have in the United States, the so-called anti-slap legislation, in the sense that we are perceiving in several cases people, especially powerful people connected to several different groups, using the legal system to try to silence people in general, specifically these communities when they try to raise the problem. It's very common for Brazilians to say, no, Brazil doesn't really have harassment or a racism problem because we are a melting pot of races, half of the population is African Brazilian, that kind of stuff. But in practice, you see it every single day. So these initiatives are being very helpful, and we really believe that specifically in that scenario, we already are seeing the results. I mean, as a result of that seminar, for example, we already see more African Brazilians interested in creating content. They are no longer afraid of replying back. And of course, especially on social media, but of course, with the due level of care that these kinds of responses demand. It's very easy, especially when you're being attacked 24/7, to kind of like elevate the fight rather than, for example, responding in a more appropriate manner. And what I have noticed so far is that the whole idea of counter speech is growing. But as that grows in the region, so will grow the need for this kind of anti-slap status, because people then use the counter speech of the victim to actually file lawsuits against them, saying that the counter speech itself was offensive. So it's really something that needs to be worked on, and maybe on a different level. Those are the main points I wanted to raise right now. Let's move on for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcel. That's exactly 5 minutes. Thank you. And Hira from Digital Rights Foundation, please take us to Pakistan and the wonderful work that I know that you and your colleagues are doing there.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. I just want to set up the context for Pakistan first. Pakistan very recently just finally passed the Prevention of Electronic Crimes Act, which this came after a really long struggle. It looks good on paper, but what it actually does is it focuses on unpopular opinions, like which against the government. So it's not really that great. There is focus on cyber crimes, harassment online, but the vague definition in the act itself, it makes the act weak. So anyway, I just want to set up the context for Pakistan. What Digital Rights Foundation does as an operational response, we started the Hamara Internet project, which literally means our internet. What we did was we went around schools and universities. We started doing awareness sessions aimed specifically at girls and young women, and to teach them because the thing is, people don't even realize that you can be harassed online, that you could be damaged in any way or get hurt online because it's not a physical space, right? So we go and talk to young women. We teach them, or show them, not teach them exactly, but we show them that yes, this is a thing that happens, and you can protect yourself from it, and it's okay to reach out and seek help. And we did this to create awareness, basically. But what we realized during the sessions was that numerous girls, they would come up to us at the end of the session and confide in us for the very first time in their lives about all the online harassment that they were facing. And this was the kind of harassment that they can't really talk to anyone else about, because in Pakistan, I mean, the conservative environment, the kind of conservative environment that we have, either the girls would be victim shamed or blamed, and from their own friends and family. Or that's the best case scenario. Or in the worst case scenario, they can be killed for it. Because of course, no matter whose fault it is, the girl obviously has to have done something to have been harassed online. So so we recognize the need for a platform where girls could come up to us, or young women could come up to someone and confide in them anonymously, and they could assure themselves that their identity would remain anonymous, and they wouldn't be even further, their reputation wouldn't be even further damaged because of going out to seek help. So basically, we have two problems here. One is the psychological distress that people of victims of online harassment face, and then there's the added distress of the fact that you don't have a support system around you to help you get through all of that. So at Digital Rights Foundation, what we saw that there was a need for an anonymous platform, so we came up with the decision to start a cyber harassment helpline, and it's a very young helpline. It was just started on the 1st of December right now, 2 days ago basically. And why we decided to go for the helpline was so we could ensure that that the girls have an anonymous platform and to confide in us. And basically, we centered our entire policy on giving them as much privacy and ensuring their confidentiality as much as possible. So people could actually come up to us, and not just girls, of course, but men, because of course, even when men complain about online harassment, they're told to just deal with it. It's not a real thing. It's just online. So people from whoever are the victims of online harassment, they could come up to us. And the thing about Pakistan is, aside from the 3 big cities in Pakistan, in the far-flung areas of Pakistan, there's no real awareness of cyber harassment. People use Facebook, people use the internet, right? But there's no real awareness that cyber crimes are a real thing, or that there's even a law which protects them. So the harassment helpline, basically, it's a 3-pronged helpline. It gives them psychological and emotional support. It gives them digital security assistance, and it gives them legal advice as well. So we can't really go out and start the procedure for them, legal proceedings for them, but we do give advice on how to do what they should do if they do want to carry out a legal case against their harassers. And of course, we want to build awareness that this is the act, and this is the rights that it gives you, and you can protect yourself, and we are here to help you. And another reason why we decided to go with the helpline is because there's no real concept of psychological support, or that psychological illnesses or distress that people face. So we have a platform here that people can receive psychological and emotional support without actually having to ask for it. Or, I mean, sometimes it just helps if someone comes up to you and says, hey, listen, I know what you're going through is rough, I know this is really difficult, and there are people out there who understand what you're going through, and we are here to help, we are here to listen to you. And which is something that they can't receive from their friends and family. So, and on the helpline team, we have an experienced lawyer, we have a digital security expert, and the entire team also went through counseling training. So we are well prepared to answer calls. But even then, when you hear the stories about the kind of online harassment that people are facing, it shakes you up for a while, and then you have to just, you have to like settle yourself down to actually help them, because, you know. So anyway, the helpline is also in the process of developing a referral system. So obviously, behind the phone, you can't really help people as much, and we have limited resources. But we're developing a referral system so people who need extensive support can actually go out and get them. And the referral system is basically is vetted by us. So we know these are trusted people who they can go to for psychological support, for legal support, and they will be safe in their hands even if they're not exactly working with us. And just to clarify, when I say that we're a very young helpline, again, like I said, we just started 2 days ago, so I can't really tell you about the exact response that we've gotten, but even within 2 days, the number and the nature of calls that, the number and nature of calls we received is shaking us up. And just the last thing, one of the things that, because we're not affiliated with the government, it's actually difficult for us because we can't exactly reach out to we can't take action ourselves against the harassers. So it's a little difficult cooperating with the legal enforcement authorities and getting them to do their jobs, because we're here to help, but they're not exactly doing their jobs, and we can't do our job unless they're doing theirs. So sorry to take up so much time.
Not at all. Thank you so much, Hara. And I should have booked a longer slot for this session because it's so interesting, and we now only have 10 minutes for the last bit. So we'll have to speak very quickly. I wanted to just follow up on the concept of counter-speech, because I saw both Gbenga and Ellery, and maybe also the others, from your perspective, very briefly, because I also want to just have 1 or 2 questions for the audience, the role or the value of that from your perspective.
I think counter-speech needs to be broken down as a term, because a lot of times it's put out as this strong solution, and something that, you know, we don't have, not around the world. There's really different kinds of norms about how critique can work, and if it's okay or not, and if response is okay, and how you do that. So counter-speech could mean a lot of things. It's really hard sometimes to engage in that way, and I think it matters tremendously what kind of harassment you're receiving, because if you're being called a whore, you know, I'm not sure what you can speak back to that, but usually that's going to make things worse for you. The question, and maybe I can then pass this to you, something we've been talking about a lot lately is allies, and who are people who are able to really powerfully act as allies to a person who is receiving this kind of harassment and really is probably not going to be able to get out of it on their own.
I mean, just to add to that, I mean, even offline, when you see a bully, the best response to a bully isn't the person being bullied. It's usually a community of people around them. And I think that, you know, this sense of building a community, which means, and it means that today I'm community for you, tomorrow you're community for me, and that's the whole African concept of Ubuntu. I am because you are, and I think that that's one thing that we must, you know, be able to, you know, tease out and find a way to make it work.
That's excellent. I think it's a common theme amongst a lot of you, is that the focus on sort of supportive communities and allies and as a response. we only have a few minutes, so but I wanted to just I know that we have some great people in the audience also, and I wanted to give just a few minutes for questions, and maybe I know that Mishi, you have just launched a great report. Mishi from the Software Freedom Law Center in India, you've launched a great report on online harassment as almost as a form of censorship. Is that so? If you have a minute or two to just very briefly say that some of the main takeaways from that would be very interesting.
Oh, very succinct, a minute or two. Yes, thank you. We just launched this last week in New Delhi, India. It's called Online Harassment, a Form of Censorship. It thankfully covers almost everything you panelists touched upon, from 66A to what it does to the identity of the victim, and what are the various ways either the platform companies have come up with to address this abuse, or what the victims themselves can do. We titled it Online Harassment as a Form of Censorship because what we understood was this all led to curbing of one's own expressions. And it's not that we did not think that it was important to call attention to the hurt or to the form of agony that is imposed on people when they are visualized as victims of crime, rape, burning, or whatever. But what we wanted to do was that what it does, and wanted to call attention to the fact that how this acts as a blow against freedom of expression itself. One of the platform companies calls itself the free speech side of the free speech movement. We think it's a cute idea, and we would like to think that it's true. But what part of our report shows is that actually they're also the free speech end of the censorship movement. And that's not by design, but that's how it comes up to be. Our methodology involves interviewing a lot of people. Very many of these people have been in the public. These are journalists. These are people who are activists who faced many things which you touched about. It is unnerving when somebody says to someone, probably I'm not going to read it, but I'm going to pass this around, and or I should read it. It says, bloody bitch, you should be gang raped and telecasted live. That will be an awesome experience. And how does a woman actually respond to such a thing? And but one of the interesting things which we concluded after having spoken to more than 35 people, which is not representative of the entire population of our country, but is that nobody was interested in law enforcement. They told us many of the times that the law enforcement officers were woefully underprepared when it came to holding the perpetrators of online harassment accountable for their actions. And it takes no time from starting to address online harassment to actually turning it into a censorship tool, which is what we saw in 66A, and it took us so much time. On the existing mechanisms of abuse reportage and redressal available, we were told that they're sketchy. They're improving with with many of the platforms, Facebook and Twitter being the most popular, but the companies can do better, and they are doing better. Twitter released another update to its terms of service on November 15th. But in summation, what we understood was that the degree to which online expression of hate and online harassment affected particular individuals was highly subjective. And it depended on what their community was, how much resilient they themselves was, and what was the response which they got. But I want to stress and highlight it again. This is becoming a far more complicated matter than just saying counter speech or not counter speech. We've seen what Albright's research tells us about fake news and propaganda which is coming in. So just saying that let's go to law enforcement or just having somebody help you counter speech, it's not that easy. So again, we have more copies, but they're also available online. It documents what people said to us because it has interviews, what various companies' policies are, and what worldwide we are seeing also in terms of mechanisms to help address the issue. Thank you.
Is it sflc.in?
It is sflc.in.
So people can download it there.
Thank you.
That's
yes,
excellent.
SFLC, Software Freedom Law Center.in. It's on the website, and we will have some copies around also if you need physical copies. But yes, thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Mishi and Rebecca. And we'll see when we get kicked out of this session, but we have someone coming in probably very soon. But I wanted to just take a quick round of questions if there is anyone who'd like to pose something to our wonderful panelists. If anyone is interested. Yes, please. There you go.
With Connect Safely in the United States. So the issue of counter speech, I'm wondering to what extent it actually is productive. I mean, we all say it's a good thing, and I've said it's a good thing, but has there been any kind of measurement as to whether or not it truly is effective? I mean, it seems intuitively that it should be, but I also worry that perhaps counter speech just simply adds to the argument, and the trolls and the negative people would simply ignore it or counter that.
I think it just depends so much on what you're actually talking about, what are you expressing about, and who's attacking you as a result. And I think that there's probably research on this. It'd be great if anybody here knows of any that we can look at, but I think it is so contextual that it's hard to say. I also think that the issue of identity and character assassination is so prevalent, and that's where it becomes really hard to imagine what kind of a counter speech response a person being targeted can give when the conversation or the comment turns to something really ugly and just not, you're not going to go anywhere good
So
with
just
that.
from my own personal experience as a journalist, years ago when readers would attack me, usually for my opinion, and I would respond, almost inevitably I would wind up making a friend because they were recognized by an authority figure and they were engaged, and that was good. That hasn't been happening lately. Now what I'm seeing more is just they simply pour on, and it seems to help less than it used to.
I think it does happen. I think it happens more in semi-private spaces maybe than in the public internet, but again, it's a really, really wide range that we're talking about, so it's probably hard to say. Others have thoughts.
Excellent. I'll take the question from the gentleman down the corner there.
Thank you. My name is Mugambi Laibuta. So I work with Jonathan at MLDI. Just a few comments about, you mentioned about Kenya. When the takedown of the laws that are criminal in nature, what happens is that now it brings private prosecution. And with private prosecutions, there are highly prohibitive fines that are given that really now, it's too much for the people online. Then secondly, another comment I wanted to make is, how do we deal with bots? Because there's a lot of, because it's easy to say that you harassed me online, I can identify you, but there's also the issue is there a right to anonymity online? Because what the government, like in Kenya, does is that they create hundreds of bots. So you'll find like 50 bots are harassing you at the same time. And these are bots that some have like 1 follower or 0 follower, and you really can't identify. So I think that's an emerging issue, especially with the state, because they know they can't take down the internet, they can't arrest me as an individual, it will cause uproar. So all they do is just create all these anonymous platforms that we really have no idea how to deal with them. I don't know, maybe someone has an idea how this may be done. Thank you.
Gemenga?
So we've dealt a lot with this issue of bots and anonymity, a lot. And the reason for that is because a lot of security agencies, when we talk about digital rights, always refer to, anyone can be anything on the internet and things like that. But one of the things that were found useful in our conversation, and this is not exactly a conversation right now. Now it's a conversation. One of the things we found useful is to say that the difference between somebody who is using anonymity to save their lives or to present their views because they're scared of any reprimand and bots, there's a clear difference. And the difference is this. There's a theme to bots that are created to attack. All they do is attack. But there is a theme to people who create their accounts to express views, to share opinion. It's almost human versus non-human. What we've seen during elections is that very clearly the bots created by government do one thing. they cut and paste. So one of the tests we did, and this worked 100% of the time, was take that tweet, the entire tweet, copy it and paste it, and click enter, and you will find 15, 20, at times 40, and those sharing the same thing, attacking one person. I know this is not scientific, but I think this can form the basis to say that there's a clear distinction between bots and people who are saving their lives, because there are people who, the moment they reveal who they are, and we've seen them across various spaces, the moment they reveal who they are, number one, they are open to threats. Number two, it sort of delegitimizes what they're saying, because then, yeah, that's shut up. I know that means shut up.
Bienvenidos al Foro de Gobernanza e Internet México 2016.
It is. Yeah. It's well, we can just. I mean, we're running into overtime. I think really there's a lot of problematic stuff going on, but interestingly, there's also so many great creative responses and great people out there who are working on this. You all included. And I don't know if either Jonathan or Marcel or Tyler would have a few, just 10 seconds of remarks, but otherwise I don't want to wrap it up.
The Internet Governance Forum 2016.
I think let's just go on for like 2 minutes. Marcel, please.
So to the point that companies should do better, yes, companies ought to do better all the time. I mean, basically, it's very hard to tackle. It's an ongoing challenge. For example, the fake news issue that was raised here is obviously an ongoing theme, and to what extent companies need to have better systems to work that out. And I really agree with the point of the counter-speech not being the only solution, obviously. Basically, we have data from lawsuits and from other cases in Brazil that do showcase that whenever victims really don't care that much about legal remedies, but much more of the sense of community. So I guess the major factor that counter-speech addresses is to make a specific platform, a specific community, a specific service less threatening to these people. So there's like an overall long-term effect on counter-speech, especially by allies, as was raised here.
Excellent. Jonathan?
I'd actually briefly come in on the anonymous speech point. We're involved in a case in Tanzania where the police can disclose, force the disclosure of user identities on the basis of suspicion or an investigation into a cybercrime, which can include cyber harassment. And I think the problem is, although anonymization, it's not an absolute right. You don't have an absolute right to anonymity online. There are occasions when it does have to be set aside. But the important thing is that states can't rely on these legal remedies to force disclosure of people's identities to kind of harass them themselves. So we're trying to push the Constitutional Court in Tanzania to say that you need to have at least a prima facie case, like a strong case, before you can force the disclosure of identities online, rather than just saying, I'm investigating something, by the way, let's get that user data, send it to me right now. That's not enough. So I think we need to be very careful about how we approach anonymous speech online, and it's a bit more of a nuanced approach, for sure. Yeah.
Thank you. Hira, do you have any final thoughts?
No, I just want to say, I mean, when we're talking about cyber harassment, I think one of the topic of discussions that comes up is where do we draw the line between free speech and online harassment? I mean, who gets to define that? Who gets to define the line between that? Why, what reasoning? I mean, it's a very big issue and there's a lot of stakeholders involved. So I think it's going to take a long process.
Ellery, like 2 seconds, final.
Just to
And
add to that, direct threats of violence are a separate category under many countries' laws and the terms of service and community standards of many of the major social media platforms. It's a really important distinction. It's really been a challenge for the companies, and I really want them to do better on it.
I think on that note, as we are gradually being disrupted by the IGF in our conversation, I'd like to just thank you all for taking part, both the panelists and the audience. There's so many great things going on in trying to find ways of constructively responding to this, and I'd be really happy to find a way to continue the conversation. So please talk to me or talk to our panelists and to keep it going, because there really is an unfortunately immense need for finding creative and community-led responses, amongst others. Thank you very much.